It's kind of wild when you think about it. Charles Richter, the Richter scale,
Yeah.
the one that measures earthquakes. Well, his own life as a kid was anything but stable. His parents, they didn't have the best relationship, and they ended up splitting up.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you, right, how much those early experiences can kind of shake things up and maybe even shape who you become later on.
You're absolutely right. And, that's exactly what we're diving into today, this deep dive, the life and work of Charles Francis Richter, really trying to see how those personal experiences, all the ups and downs, all the complexities kind of weave themselves into his work. And what work it was. Monumental scientific achievements. We've got some really fascinating stuff here that sheds light on a lot.
Yes.
His childhood, some of the hurdles he faced, the legacy he built. It's all pretty amazing when you start digging in.
I totally agree. And for everyone listening, we're not stopping at just understanding the Richter scale itself, right? I mean, that's interesting and all. But what we really want to do is uncover the human story behind it. What can we learn from Richter's life about dealing with instability, about finding purpose even when things are tough,
Yeah.
about leaving a mark on the world that really lasts?
Yeah.
So to kick things off, let's go way back to the beginning. His early years in Ohio.
Okay, so picture this. 1900, Hamilton, Ohio. That's where Charles Richter enters the scene. And from what our sources tell us, his early life, it wasn't exactly peaceful. His parents, their relationship, it was rocky, to say the least. And when they eventually called it quits, you can imagine the kind of disruption that caused for, a young kid. And then in 1909, big change. His mom decides to move the family to Los Angeles. And that move, geographically, obviously, but I think maybe emotionally, too. It seems like a real turning point in his life.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, right? You're a kid, you leave behind everything you know. Makes you wonder about the moments in your own life, right? Those times when you had to pack up and move or circumstances just shifted completely. How did those changes, whether it was the scenery or just your situation, how did they kind of nudge you in a different direction? Did they open up unexpected doors? Or throw some curveballs your way that you had to navigate, and maybe those challenges, those detours, they kind of shaped who you are now?
That's a really good point, and it's almost ironic when you think about it. This kid moves to Los Angeles, the city that, becomes so closely tied to earthquakes. It's almost like he traded one kind of instability for another, although obviously on a very different scale. But okay, let's move on. Let's talk about his teenage years, because from what we're seeing here, it doesn't sound like those were exactly a walk in the park either.
Not exactly. What we're getting from the material is a picture of a teenager who, struggled socially. He was described as awkward, even experienced some bullying. It's interesting, right? You have this kid who's clearly super bright, intellectually gifted, but fitting in, connecting with his peers, it just didn't seem to come easy. And it makes you wonder, could those experiences, those moments of feeling like an outsider, could they have actually influenced his scientific thinking later on? Like maybe because he felt a little bit on the fringes, it allowed him to see the world and eventually the Earth itself with a different set of eyes, with a unique perspective that was maybe more focused, more meticulous.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? It's often the things that make us feel different or even isolated that turn into these unexpected strengths. Maybe that early sense of not quite belonging, it built a resilience in him, a mental toughness that really helped him in his scientific work. It definitely makes you think about your own life, right? Those times when the things that made you feel different, maybe even like a bit of a misfit, they turned out to be your strengths, even if they felt more like challenges at the time.
Right. And that resilience, that mental strength, it would be put to the test in a big way, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because our source material then dives into something really important, his mental health.
Exactly. So we're talking about Richter at age 20. He's just graduated from Stanford. Bright future ahead, right? But then he gets hit with a pretty severe bout of depression. It's a good reminder that even the most brilliant minds, they can struggle with mental health challenges. What's really striking, though, is how he comes out of this period. It doesn't define him in a negative way. In fact, it seems like it actually deepens his empathy. It makes him really value well-being, both for himself and for others. Did the source material give any hints about whether this experience might have subtly shaped his later work or how he interacted with people?
It's a really good question. I mean, the sources don't explicitly connect the dots in that way, but it definitely raises the possibility that going through something so personal, so challenging, it probably gave him insights that we can only imagine. And it just highlights how important it is to talk about mental health, to address it head on. And it shows how sometimes, working through those struggles can lead to a deeper understanding, not just of yourself, but of others too. So after he navigates this period, how does he even end up in seismology? Because it sounds like it wasn't exactly a straight path, right?
No, not at all. The source material actually calls it a happy accident. He was recommended for a position at the Seismological Laboratory at Caltech. And when you zoom out and look at the big picture, it just shows you, again, how these chance encounters, these random opportunities, they can really steer your life in a whole new direction. I mean, he didn't set out to study earthquakes. It wasn't his childhood dream. But this one recommendation, it becomes the central focus of his career. It's pretty amazing. Think about your own life, right? Were there any events, maybe small at the time, or recommendations that, looking back, had a huge impact on where you ended up?
Yeah, it's funny how those things work. They seem so insignificant in the moment. And then years later, you realize, wow, that was a turning point. Okay, so this happy accident leads him to Caltech. And that brings us, of course, to 1935 and the Richter scale.
And there it is, 1935, the Richter scale is unveiled. And this was his masterpiece, his breakthrough. What's really cool is that he didn't just create some complex formula that only a handful of scientists could understand. He found a way to measure something as powerful, as terrifying even, as earthquakes, and he presented it in a way that everyone could grasp. Before the Richter scale, describing the size of an earthquake, it was more subjective. This scale, it gave everyone a common language, numbers, and that was a game changer, both for scientists and for the public.
Yeah, imagine the responsibility that comes with that, right? Suddenly your name is practically synonymous with earthquakes. How do you even wrap your head around that kind of fame, that kind of association with something so powerful, so potentially destructive?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What does that kind of recognition do to a person?
From what we gather in the source material, it seems like he handled it with a mix of pride, pride in the scientific achievement, but also with a lot of humility. Like, he understood how important his work was, but he never lost sight of the sheer power of nature. But his contributions, they didn't stop with the scale, did they? He became a pretty vocal advocate for earthquake safety as well.
Absolutely. He wasn't content with just measuring earthquakes. He wanted to help prevent the damage, the destruction. Our source material points to his work in the 60s in Los Angeles. He campaigned hard to get rid of architectural elements that were known to be dangerous during earthquakes. And it's believed that those efforts actually saved lives during the 1971 quake. He really pushed for change, put himself out there. It makes me think, have you ever felt that pull, that need to speak up for something you believed in, even if it meant going against the grain, even if it was the harder path? It's a great example of how knowledge, especially scientific knowledge, it shouldn't just stay in the lab. Richter saw how his understanding of earthquakes could make a real difference in people's lives, and he acted on it. But moving beyond his professional life, the source material also touches on some interesting and maybe even surprising aspects of his personality.
Yeah, what struck me was how the sources paint a picture of a man who is full of contradictions. You have this brilliant scientist who also struggled socially, this serious researcher who loved poetry, this public figure who had a private life that, well, some might call unconventional. The source material even mentions his interest in nudist camps, which, just goes to show you how he wasn't afraid to be himself, even if it went against the norm.
It challenges the idea, doesn't it, that genius has to fit into a neat little box. He was complex, he had his quirks, and that's a good reminder for all of us, right? To embrace our own unique qualities, the things that make us who we are, even the parts that might seem a little weird to others, because those things, they might just be the key to your own success in ways you never expected. And Richter certainly didn't let what other people thought stop him from pursuing his interests.
Exactly. And even though he passed away in 1985, his legacy, well, it's still very much alive. It's kind of a sad irony, that a lot of his personal belongings were destroyed in a fire that was caused by the 1994 Northridge earthquake, the very phenomenon he dedicated his life to understanding. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, about the forces of nature and how fragile our positions really are.
Yeah.
But the source makes a really important point. Richter's true legacy, it's not in those lost objects.
Yeah.
It's in the impact he had on seismology, on the students he inspired, and on how his work continues to advance our understanding of earthquakes. It's a great question for all of us to think about, right? What kind of ripples are our actions creating? What will our legacy be long after we're gone? What mark will you leave on the world?
It's a powerful thought. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life of Charles Francis Richter, here's a question I want you to consider. How can you see your own life through the lens of his journey? Can you look at your own struggles not as roadblocks, but as opportunities for growth? Can you see how they might give you a unique perspective, even lead to innovation?
Right. And can you pinpoint your own seismic shifts, those pivotal moments that changed your course? How can you, in a sense, calibrate your own personal Richter scale? How can you measure your dreams, your aspirations, and take action to achieve them? It's about realizing that just like the Earth, you have the potential for change, for growth within you.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Until next time.